My folks gave my childhood house to my sister practically for free, claiming I wasn't worthy because I didn't prioritize family. After being ignored for years, I purchased the house back. And I kicked her out precisely when she required it the most. It's remarkable how monumental events can start with something completely mundane. For me, it began with a regular Tuesday dinner at my parents' place. My mom, Catherine, was fussing over my sister Freya's children, while I absent-mindedly moved my mashed potatoes around my plate. I should have sensed something was amiss when my dad, Jack, kept giving me these odd looks, a combination of guilt and defiance, but I was preoccupied with a work assignment. The realtor tells us we can finalize the deal by the month's end, Freya said without much emotion, and I almost sputtered my water everywhere. I was aware my parents had discussed downsizing, moving to a smaller place as they aged, yet this was the initial I'd learned of any concrete plans. "That's fantastic, sweetie," Catherine declared cheerfully, extending her hand to squeeze Freya's. "It'll be wonderful having you and the children living in the old place." I set my fork down slowly. "Hold on, what?" The subsequent silence was absolutely intense. My mom abruptly became very involved in assisting my 4-year-old niece in cutting her chicken. Freya showed some discomfort, but my dad met my gaze with that same peculiar, confrontational look. "Your sister is acquiring the home," he stated directly. "I've been mulling this over for some time. It's been a long time. Okay, I get it. I'm a financial advisor, after all. I'm fully aware of the housing market's trajectory in our locale. This house, the place I grew up, is in the neighborhood. The same house where I invested countless hours helping my father refinish those original hardwood floors and swap out the old windows during those long college summers. It should be valued at nothing less than $750,000 in today's market." "So what's the sale price?" I inquired, doing my best to keep my voice even, more silent treatment. "Dad, $200,000, Freya replied in a hushed tone. "They're giving me a family discount." I felt like I'd just been sucker punched. A family discount, that wasn't a discount, it was practically giving it away. And no one thought to even clue me in on this, much less offer me the same chance. "Were you even planning to tell me about this at all?" I questioned, looking around the table. My mom avoided my gaze. "Ethan," my father began, his voice adopting that lecturing cadence he used when he believed he was being profoundly insightful. "Your sister has 3 kids to consider. She needs the extra space and she's carrying on the family legacy. He stopped, struggling to find the right words. "You're concentrating on different things." "Different things, right, because I chose to chase my career rather than immediately starting a family after college. Because at 32, I was still single and without children. I was more fixated on growing my investment account than changing diapers. It didn't matter that I had been. I've been providing them with financial support for a long time, covering costs like home improvements and their medical expenses, things their retirement funds couldn't manage on their own." "I understand," I murmured softly. "Does all of this somehow make me less worthy of the same chances as everyone else?" "Don't be so over the top, Ethan," Freya interjected, jiggling her youngest child on her lap. "You earn a good salary. You don't need the same assistance that I do. Plus, you're never even around these days. When was the last time you just stopped by for a friendly visit? Not because Mom made you feel bad for not being there." I felt like I needed to tell them that my busyness stemmed from me constructing something important, that I couldn't just abandon everything to attend these spur-of-the-moment family get-togethers the way she could. I also wanted to remind them that I had been financially supporting them for the past 5 years, while Freya was too preoccupied with her seemingly perfect family life to see that our parents were having difficulties. But what would that accomplish? "Catherine," my father interjected firmly, seeing my mother about to say something. She immediately shut her mouth and returned to focusing on the children. I slowly rose to my feet, my dinner mostly uneaten. "Thanks for the meal, Mom. I should probably head out. I have an early meeting tomorrow." "Ethan, don't be like this," Freya said as I moved toward the exit. "It's just a matter of family. Family matters." I paused in the doorway, turning to look back at them all, my father's unyielding expression, my mother's ashamed face, Freya's self-satisfied concern, and her children, completely unaware of the friction in the room. "Freya, the situation involves the family, and you made it crystal clear to me how insignificant I am in this family." Driving home that night, my thoughts were completely jumbled. $200,000. It felt like they were practically giving away my childhood home because my sister had children and I didn't. My sister seemed to fit their idea of a family person, while I didn't. They felt she deserved the help, while I didn't, regardless of the fact that she needed it because she and her husband had been extravagant with their spending for years, while I carefully managed my finances. But as I arrived at my apartment, a strange sense of peace washed over me. I work as a financial advisor. I completely understand how money works, how the economy operates, and most importantly, how people handle their finances. Freya has always been awful with money, always living hand to mouth, despite her husband having a good salary. 200,000 for a house that was worth almost 4 times that amount. Even with both of their incomes combined, that was going to be a challenge. I turned on my laptop and opened up some financial modeling software. It was time to calculate some scenarios. After all, they wanted to treat this like a business matter. Fine, let's see how business is actually done. Who knew? Maybe my different priorities would end up being beneficial after all. Things have changed. Time has a weird way of uncovering things. It's been 2 years since that meal where I found out my parents had practically gifted our family home to my sister, Freya. It's been 2 years of keeping my distance, of communicating politely but quickly. I've always found myself attending holiday events, observing and holding myself back, even though I acted like I was okay with everything. I wouldn't have thought the first sign of trouble would surface at the Easter meal. Freya was discussing the new granite countertops she was considering, and my mom, Catherine, made a comment about the house's original appeal adding to its personality. "But it's my house now," Freya responded, with a tone I'd never known from her. "I believe I can decide what happens to it." The expression on my mother's face was vindication for all the uncomfortable family functions I'd survived. It was the initial time I saw her truly realize the implications of giving up the house. She had surrendered her control and authority over what happened to it. The problems intensified over the following months. Freya's husband, Jackson, started arriving late to family get-togethers with a slight aroma of bourbon on him. Their seemingly flawless family facade began to fall apart. The kids seemed less energetic, less inclined to play and shout with happiness like they used to. I kept myself removed, but I still witnessed quite a lot. Being the one who wasn't involved in the family had benefits. No one noticed when I remained quietly in the background, watching and taking it all in. My father Jack's proud posture whenever Freya was present began to seem artificial. My mom's smiles became forced when Freya described her recent plans to remodel, removing another part of their past. Then the day arrived when my mother called me, sobbing. "Freya's putting in a swimming pool," she cried. "Your father's rose garden." I was preparing to unearth everything. I listened, saying nothing, recalling how Dad had lovingly tended those roses for 3 decades. "It's Mom's house now," I stated softly. "That's what you wanted, don't you recall?" The quiet on her end was unbelievably loud. Half a year later, Jackson left. Evidently, his alcohol consumption wasn't the only difficulty. He'd also been squandering their money on gambling. Freya attempted to conceal this. However, in our little town, news spreads rapidly, particularly when you work in finance and are always informed about the local happenings. I began to hear whispers about late mortgage payments. There wasn't anything official yet, but the indications were present. Freya's seemingly flawless existence was deteriorating bit by bit. She had gotten a second mortgage to pay for all those remodeling projects, relying on Jackson's earnings to pay it off. Now, she was attempting to balance raising 3 children, paying the house payment she could barely manage, and dealing with a divorce. My folks started visiting my apartment more frequently. They never directly expressed remorse for what had occurred with the property, but I could perceive the sadness in their gaze. They would observe me working on my laptop, handling my expanding investment account, and I could almost sense them contemplating how differently things might have played out. "You've done well, son," my father commented one night, observing my home workspace. The pride in his tone was unfamiliar and about 2 years too late. I didn't say a whole lot in return to those gestures. I had become patient. Each time Freya called our parents asking for financial assistance. Whenever she'd vent about the expenses of that enormous house, I would just stay silent and observe. That home, almost given to her for free, was becoming a burden she couldn't escape. Then, last week, it all came to a head. I was scrolling through some real estate listings when I found it, a foreclosure notice. Freya had fallen behind on 4 mortgage payments. She owed more than the house was worth, and since the divorce wasn't finalized, she couldn't secure a new loan. Without even finishing the document, I grabbed my phone and immediately called my attorney. 2 years of patiently waiting, of making smart investments and building up my finances, it was all about to come to fruition. The bank would want a fast sale to recoup their money, and I would be prepared. My phone vibrated. It was a text from Freya. Can we talk? It concerns the house. I stared at the message for quite some time, reflecting on that family get-together 2 years ago, those family prices, and how much she valued family, about how karma and being patient would pay off. Sure, I replied. I'm available tomorrow afternoon. I'd made one last call. The coffee shop where I met Freya was a neutral place. I got there ahead of time, watching from the window as she drove up in her fancy SUV, which she likely couldn't continue to pay for. Her expensive purse looked a little frayed, and her expertly applied makeup couldn't completely cover up how tired she seemed. Thanks for agreeing to meet, she said as she sat down. I need your assistance. I took a leisurely sip of my coffee. I sat here with my coffee and I recalled the things she'd said 2 years prior. It was all business or a personal matter, and she seemed to wince. I realized the house, the payments were way overdue. Jackson's gambling issues were more serious than I'd ever imagined, and now with the divorce, her voice trailed off as she gazed at her unsipped latte. The bank was going to take the house. I responded softly, "That's really too bad." What exactly did she want me to do? She simply wanted to be alone. She just needed time until she could get a new loan. She said I'd always been financially savvy, and she knew I was successful. She leaned across the table, wanting to hold my hand. I subtly recoiled, and she let her hand fall. She said, "Please, Ethan, the kids are attached to that house. It's our family home." Our family home. I almost couldn't help but chuckle. Was this the same house she purchased with the family discount because she saw herself as more of a family person than me? The same house where she got rid of Dad's roses and disregarded Mom's tears? That family home. I had to admit I was wrong. She admitted in a whisper, we were all wrong. Was that what I wanted to hear? I took a folder out of my bag and placed it on the table. The bank was already in the process of selling the house. They'd already agreed to a buyer's offer. Her complexion turned white. "What? No, that can't be true," she insisted. "I haven't even had a chance to." The paperwork was finalized yesterday. I added, opening the folder. Did she want to see who the purchaser was? Her hands trembled as she scanned through the documents. I saw the truth hit her like a ton of bricks. You purchased our house?" she stammered. "I purchased a foreclosed home at its going rate," I told her. "It's just a transaction, correct?" "But what about my children? Where will we go?" I said. "You'll need to leave in a month," pushing the eviction notice across the table. I suggested she start getting ready. The following weeks were a complete mess. My parents found out naturally. My mom called me, sobbing, practically pleading with me to change my mind. My dad barged into my office, radiating fury about the importance of family. I let him rant. "Are you finished?" I inquired when he finally wound down. "Because I have some fascinating documents to show you." I took out the financial records I had collected over the last couple of years, the gambling losses, the second mortgage, and the credit card bills that showed Freya and Jackson had been overspending for ages. "She would have lost the house anyway," I said, keeping my voice even. "At least this way it remains within the family, just not her branch of it." When Freya moved out, I was standing in the driveway observing the moving vans. She had cleaned the house out, taking everything she could. I didn't intervene. The furniture was irrelevant, so were the fixed elements of the house. The only thing that was truly significant was the feeling when I stepped inside my old house, holding the keys and understanding it was finally mine, completely mine. I dedicated the next month to undoing the alterations Freya had made. I swapped out the granite countertops for butcher block, mirroring the originals. The awful, contemporary light fixtures were removed, and the traditional ones were reinstalled. I found landscapers to revitalize Dad's rose garden, utilizing cuttings I'd carefully taken before Freya destroyed everything. Yesterday, I had my parents over for dinner. They were a little reluctant, but they ended up coming. My mom got teary when she saw the roses blooming again. My dad was in the kitchen, touching the butcher block countertop, appearing lost in a sea of recollections. "We should have given it to both of you," he eventually stated. "We should have been equitable." "Absolutely," I responded. "You really should have." "The house appears it feels like home once more," my mom murmured quietly. I filled 3 wine glasses and gave one to each of them. "To family," I declared, lifting my glass, "and to figuring out what that actually entails." They hesitantly lifted their glasses too. As we stood there in that kitchen where I had spent my childhood, I started thinking about Freya, who was probably moving into her new apartment not far away. I was considering her children, who I had already organized to visit their grandparents in this house on a regular basis. And then I considered justice. It wasn't the quick, theatrical type that most people want, but the slow, carefully planned. The satisfaction I feel is a certain type, a reward for those patient enough to see things through. That feeling I thought as I gazed at the house, which at last was legally and rightfully mine. Sometimes, having a family mindset isn't necessarily about having children or setting up big holiday meals. It's often about recognizing what's important to protect and the willingness to defend it. My dad gazed at me for a time and then nodded slowly. We didn't have to verbally express anything further. Certain things are best discovered quietly, with the subtle fragrance of roses wafting in from outside the window. I also felt the comforting heaviness of the keys in my pocket, keys that were destined to be mine all along. I ended this narrative with a sense of payback, something that felt deserved, not just spiteful. I chose to emphasize justice obtained through careful planning and waiting rather than acting cruelly. The conclusion of the story provided resolution, while also retaining the complicated feelings that exist within families.